is coming my way. Wherever I go, hard luck is there to stay. Good luck never stays a day. Bad luck's always coming my way.
It's been a long time since Jessica and I have seen snow, especially freshly fallen snow. Now this is kind of bittersweet because this is beautiful, but we're here in Milwaukee covering one of the most gruesome serial killers the world has ever known. Jeffrey Dahmer, the Milwaukee Cannibal. Some even called him the Milwaukee Monster. Today we're going to be visiting as many of the Jeffrey Dahmer locations here in Milwaukee as possible. And it's snowing. Now before we go any further, I do want to point out a few different things. In no way, shape, or form is this video intended to glorify or sensationalize anything that happened with Jeffrey Dahmer and the victims. We're just here to document the history, no matter how good or bad. With that being said, we are not going to be showing any crime scene photos. We're not going to get into any of the gory details, but we are going to talk about a few key things, few key details at the different locations. So just be warned. This tale, the story of Jeffrey Dahmer, even though we're not going to cover all of it, it's a lot.
Police removed boxes and boxes of body parts, evidence of what appears to be a psychopathic mass murder. Authorities also took out a barrel of what they think is acid. Police are reluctant to reveal exactly how many victims there might be, but knowledgeable investigators say it could be more than a half a dozen. Neighbors say the man was strange and that there was an odor coming from the apartment. However, no one suspected the accumulation of dead bodies. In a refrigerator left as it was found, at least 2 heads, the severed remains of victims of the alleged murderer. This morning, in an unprecedented news conference, the police chief, medical examiner, and district attorney joined in a public statement.
At this point, all we can tell you is that it is a number of homicides, multiples. The investigation is still very dynamic. We don't know whether this individual acted by himself or in consort with other individuals.
The big question now is the identity of the victims, whose heads, hands, and genitals were saved in the apartment. Dentists and doctors have already started the grisly effort. So far, no identities have been determined. And the area's top prosecutor wants other victims who might have survived an encounter to come forward.
I always knew that it was wrong, but after the first killing was not planned. I was coming back from the shopping mall back in '78. I had fantasies about picking up a hitchhiker and taking him back to the house and having complete control and dominance over him.
The hitchhiker's name was Stephen Hicks. He was just 18. Jeffrey Dahmer took him to his parents' house. There he strangled him with a barbell. He dismembered the body and hid it in a drain pipe. It was Jeffrey Dahmer who gave those details to the police in his confession.
When you hear the name Jeffrey Dahmer, you automatically think of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. But today's video, we're going to be starting off in a little town just outside of Milwaukee called West Allis. Now, if you look, we're on the corner of 59th Street and Hayes Street. It's in this neighborhood where Jeffrey Dahmer's grandmother lived. Again, not getting into all of the details, but a little bit of a backstory. Jeffrey Dahmer committed murders between 1978 and 1991. He killed and dismembered 17 young men and boys. Now, 1978. Jeffrey Dahmer, he grew up in Bath, Ohio, not too far from Kent University. And he committed his first murder there about 3 weeks after graduation, and he buried his victim in his backyard. Now, it wasn't until maybe 8-9 years later when Jeffrey Dahmer committed his next murder, but it was after he spent some time in the Army. And this is where things get a little strange. You see, Jeffrey Dahmer didn't spend that much time in the Army. In fact, he was actually discharged, and the Army actually gave him a ticket to anywhere that he wanted to go. And instead of going back home to Bath, Ohio, he didn't want to face his parents, and also he didn't want to be around the cold. He asked the Army to send him to Miami. Now this puts Jeffrey Dahmer in Florida the same exact time that Adam Walsh disappeared, America's Most Wanted. In fact, eyewitnesses put Jeffrey Dahmer in the exact spot, I'm talking exact spot, where Adam Walsh's head was found next to a highway. Not being able to cut it in Florida, Jeffrey Dahmer reached out to his father, Lionel, and asked if he can come home to Ohio. And he agreed, and he actually stayed back in Ohio for a little bit before moving all the way out here to Milwaukee to stay with his grandmother.
So what have you been doing lately? Working and working and working and working?
Working next week, starting Monday. I go back to work Sunday nights.
Oh,
and,
boy. So you go back to work this Sunday night?
Great. Yep. You're looking good, though. You look nice and trim.
Oh, that's good to hear.
You look like you're working out.
No.
Aren't you?
Oh, I haven't worked.
Looking at Jeff, he looks entirely normal, clean cut, very nicely dressed, responds very sociably.
You still keep up your membership there, though?
There's nothing to indicate, really, that he had recently killed people.
No, I've been surviving on McDonald's food for, since I moved down there.
Well, you're looking good. Grandma was saying
Thanks.
that she thought that you got quite a bit thinner, but you look fit. I don't know.
Well, I've been surviving mostly on McDonald's food. It's just so much easier just to pop into the restaurant. But
Yeah,
like I said before, it gets too expensive, and
it does.
I have to start eating at home more.
And of course, you woke up at what, 8 this morning?
Right.
And then you cleaned up your apartment really nicely so you could show us what it looks like.
Yeah, I want you to come over if you feel like it. I haven't done any dusting or vacuuming or anything. I do that on Sundays. But
Do you know who the other person is there? That beautiful blonde sitting on the couch? Yawning?
And Cherry.
That's right.
And who is this?
Yes.
That's Cousin Jeff.
Yes.
Oh, my word. Did you see what he did? He's stone free.
Looks like a bunch of satisfied people sitting around
Did you
here.
get Topper and Mary's last?
Yes.
This small white and stone house is where Dahmer's grandmother was living. In fact, it's here in the basement where he would kill 3 more people. I'll show you. It's like a home video that Jeffrey Dahmer's father, Lionel, took when he was getting a tour of the house by his mother. If I'm not mistaken, it was for a German documentary, but it shows you the basement where it all happened. Dahmer lived here with his grandmother for quite some time. I mean, not too long, but long enough. But things weren't always peachy. You see, his grandmother had a major problem with him bringing home boys at all hours of the night. And for some reason that she couldn't figure out, there was an awful smell that was coming from the bedroom. Eventually, she ended up kicking him out, and that is how Dahmer gets to the apartment building that we're all familiar with today. Standing at the front of the house, I noticed that there was no driveway, no place for the owners to park, so there had to have been a back alley. And of course, there is one here. Now, in the video that Dahmer's father, Lionel, shot, they walk around towards the back of the house and they point the camera up to what was Jeffrey Dahmer's bedroom. And it should be right on the other side of this garage right here. Now we're not going to go into the property, we're just going to walk up to the fence.
Go away.
Go away?
Go away. I don't want you here. You can go in the front, but this is my property. Go away. Go away right now.
Okay. All right.
I mean it.
I gotcha. Now, as you saw, I got a little too close, which is fine. I wasn't going to trespass. There's no trespassing signs, but I was walking up to the fence. The owner came out and she did not want me to be back here. So respecting the wishes, I'm not going to show it. Now this is the perfect opportunity to talk about this. You never know what to expect when you're out on the road. Anything can happen. You kind of have to be prepared for anything to happen, good and bad. Now, we don't trespass, and we try really hard not to impede too much on people's personal space, and at the same time respectfully show history. Now, I probably shouldn't have gotten that close to her house, and I do apologize to the homeowner for that. Probably should have just stayed in the front. Again, I'm sorry. I was trying to do something to document history. It is what it is. Now, in a few moments, we're going to walk down the street here to where Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment once stood. It's been torn down since 1992. It was called the Oxford Apartments, and his apartment number was 213. Now, I just kind of wanted to stop here and talk about this and just show you the neighborhood. It's not at all like I pictured it would be. Not at all.
In Milwaukee, the mother of one of Jeffrey Dahmer's victims says it represents new life. The apartment building where the convicted murderer killed and mutilated many of his 17 victims is being demolished. Its owner, Campus Circle Project, has offered to help relocate the remaining residents and revitalize the neighborhood.
Again, the apartment building that Dahmer lived in and committed most of his murders was torn down in 1992. It was called the Oxford Apartments. But where it once stood is right over here across the street. And you can see the vacant lot. It has a fence around it. And my understanding, at one point they were talking about turning it into some sort of park, trying to make something beautiful out of it. But then I also heard that they don't want to build anything here at all. They just want to leave it. This brick alleyway can be seen in the photos whenever the apartment building was still standing. The telephone poles are still the same. Some of the buildings have been torn down. But if we look right over here, you can see there's that first section of the fence, and there's a clear second section. That third one, right there, that looks to be right about where the steps that went up to the building, the walkway up to the building would have been. Now, the strangest thing about it, what makes this all pretty surreal, at least for me, is, I mean, of course, I do all this research, Grimm research. We go to all these places. Charles Manson, Ted Bundy, David Berkowitz, Albert Fish. But I remember this being on the news. I remember this. Crazy. The really twisted part about all this is Jeffrey Dahmer could have been stopped so many times in the past. He even was arrested a couple of different times, and people never really caught on. He was your average looking neighbor, if you will. I mean, I guess in a way they kind of all are. But the entire time he was killing people, posing them, taking pictures, ate a few of them, hence the Milwaukee Cannibal. And how he was caught, he was going down the street. We're going to go show the Ambassador Hotel in just a moment. But the day that he was caught, he met up with 3 guys, and he convinced one of them to come back to his apartment so he can take some photos of him. And when he got him up there, his plan was to drug him with chloroform or some of the other chemicals that are around his apartment. And he was able to get handcuffs on his potential victim. And, you know, he was able to break away, and he ran out here, ran into 2 different cops, told them, hey, there's this crazy guy up the street, and they brought him back here. And they go up inside Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment. Let me turn this way so you can kind of see it. They go up into his apartment, and the police start looking around. And I think I read somewhere that Jeffrey Dahmer let it slip that the key to the handcuffs that were on this guy were in the top drawer in his bedroom. So they go into the bedroom, they open the drawer, and they find an obscene amount of Polaroid pictures of men and boys that Dahmer has killed and dismembered and posed for his own twisted pleasures. It's pretty gross. I'm getting grossed out, and this is not something that typically bothers me. So the officer takes some of the Polaroids, goes out to the living room where Dahmer is, and he shows his partner, and he says, "These are real." And immediately, Dahmer tries to make a run for it. They tack him to the ground. They put him in handcuffs. They're holding him down. And I also read that Dahmer said, "For what I'd done, I should be dead."
His macabre 13-year crime spree finally ended when this man, Tracy Edwards, brought the police to the infamous apartment. Like the others, he had gone there with the promise of money.
He was listening to my heart, because at a point he told me he was going to eat my heart at that point. I hit him and I ran.
What was the turning point for you that made you suddenly realize that you had done something terribly wrong, something you should be sorry for?
It was the night of the arrest. I have no memory of what happened during the 6 hours before the last victim ran out of the apartment. I heard a knock on the door, and the police were there with the last victim. They asked me where the key was to the handcuffs. My mind was in a haze. I sort of pointed to the bedroom, and that's where they found the pictures. And they yelled, "Cuff him." And I was handcuffed. And it was just the realization that there was no point in trying to hide my actions anymore. The best route was to help the police identify all the victims and just make a complete confession.
With Dahmer in custody, the police search the apartment and they find pieces of human body parts wrapped up like meat in the refrigerator, including a head. They find a whole bunch of bottles of chloroform and other drugs to knock people out so he can subdue them, turn them into zombies. It's pretty messed up. But the craziest thing about all this is, if you remember earlier when we were talking about his grandmother's house, that his grandmother reported a smell. In Dahmer's bedroom, there was this blue barrel that was filled with acid. And inside it, I think they found 3 or 4 torsos that he was trying to deflesh so he can bleach the bones. Now, when I said that he should have been caught on multiple occasions, it all comes down to the smell. Just like his grandmother's house, the smell was happening here because it was, dead people. It was rotting flesh. Now, at one point, he was to be evicted unless he cleaned everything up and got rid of the smell. And in his living room, he had an aquarium with tropical fish. The lady who lived directly across the hall, now think of it like this. It's an apartment building, there's a hall, there's his apartment 213, and directly across from it is somebody else who was a friend of his. So she actually helped Dahmer clean up his apartment so he wouldn't get evicted. And she went on record later on saying that there was a strong smell coming from his apartment that was just pretty foul. Dahmer, contributed it to the fish water was bad and it needed to be changed. On another occasion, his landlord was actually inside the apartment and made a comment about how bad the smell was. And Dahmer told him that it was coming from the blue barrel, which was in his bedroom. I think at this point it was in the kitchen. It's all over the place. That is where the smell was coming from. And the cause of it was he emptied the fish water into that barrel. Again, all these people in his life right there and not knowing. as horrible as the crimes were, there's one that was just completely mind-blowing to me. Now remember, Dahmer was arrested a couple different times, and quite a few times he should have been caught. Now there's one victim in particular, it was a 14-year-old boy. Dahmer liked to drill into the skulls of his victims, making them brain dead so he can have his way with them. And then he would take the acid and drip it down into the hole to cause whatever twisted. Yeah. So he did this to this 14-year-old kid, and then he left the house for a couple hours, leaving him dying on the floor in the apartment.
It all happened about 12:30 in the morning of May 27th. That's when Tina Spively says she and her friend saw Conrad Sinteson phone, stumble and fall onto State Street. They ran up to him and noticed that he was bleeding from behind, and he appeared to be drugged at that time as well. That's allegedly when Jeffrey Dahmer grabbed at the boy, and Tina says she confronted him.
I was right up on him. I'm trying to threaten him to let him go. Like, we're gonna bust you and your stuff. Turn him loose. He don't want to be with you. Leave him alone. And then my cousin was like, just get out of it. It's none of your business. I said, but still, he needs help. I said, look at him doing like they gave him some dope or something.
They were concerned for him, and they ended up calling the police. But Dahmer was able to convince the police that he wasn't 14, that he was actually 19 years old, and they were lovers and they had a fight.
This man with a quiet, almost shy demeanor became a master manipulator who was able to lure strangers he met at gay bars to his apartment. He was even able to con the police into returning a 14-year-old boy to him after neighbors called 911 upset that the child was in the street naked and bleeding. Dahmer convinced the police that he and the boy were simply having a lover's quarrel.
It's an intoxicated boyfriend of another boyfriend.
Well, how old was this child?
He wasn't a child, he was an adult.
After the police left, Jeffrey Dahmer murdered that boy. Conrad Sinteson phone.
Dahmer escorted the police up to apartment 213, his, showed the police officers some of the Polaroids that he has taken earlier of the kid. And they were like, okay, we believe you. And they left. When they left, Dahmer drilled another hole, put in more acid, and it ended up killing him. Well, we visit countless places, and I am always against buildings or places where people have died being torn down. It's history, and it should remain, good or bad. But I'll say this, and I stand behind it. I'm so glad they tore this place down. Now what you're looking at right now is the Ambassador Hotel. This is the site of Dahmer's second victim. This is the murder that pretty much set everything off, that kind of catapulted him into who he became. Now, Dahmer brought Stephen Toomey, age 24, back to this hotel, spent the night with him, woke up the next morning to find Toomey dead. No recollection of how it happened. Even so, Dahmer stuffed Toomey into a suitcase, transported the body back to his grandmother's house down to the basement, dismembered him, disposed of the body but kept the head and soaked it in bleach, like industrial strength bleach, to try to debone it. Now I know at some point somebody's going to say, wait a second, Grimm, you're leaving this out. You're leaving out these pieces of information. Again, I don't want to just sit here and read off all these different facts. Just trust me when I tell you, it's brutal, it's disgusting, and it's pretty messed up. If you want to look it up, you're more than welcome to. Now, one of the things that we try to do at this channel, and we tell everybody this, anybody and everybody can go online and look up all the facts, all the dates, down to the time, what day, who the name of the detectives were. Anybody can do that. But one thing most people can't do is go to these places themselves and see them. So that's what we try to do. We walk the history and show what the place looks like today. Now this is the entrance to the Ambassador Hotel. I'm not going to go inside. I can guarantee you that they do not want me in there with a camera. I mean, anybody who has a business more than likely does not want to be associated to something like this. You can't hide from it. But this is it.
One time I brought this young man back to the hotel room, the Ambassador Hotel. Was just planning on drugging him and spending the night with him. Had no intention of hurting him. When I woke up in the morning, he had a broken rib here, was heavily bruised. Apparently I had beaten him to death with my fists.
And you have no memory of it?
I have no memory of it. But that's what started the whole spree all over again.
Dahmer says he snuck the corpse of his victim, Stephen Toomey, out of his hotel room in a suitcase. Then he took it to his grandmother's house, where he cut up the body and put it in plastic garbage bags.
When Dahmer was living here, especially on his own after he left his grandmother's house, that road that the Ambassador Hotel is on was filled with all kinds of different bars and nightlife. And Dahmer would actually go out to, I think there was a park that was closer to downtown, which is that way, as well as a lot of the different bars that were on the road trying to pick up potential victims, lovers, if you will, somebody to have companionship with. But he just, I think at one point he even said that he took it too far. When he was growing up, as a kid, he always had these crazy urges. Remember the movie or the TV show Dexter, how there was like the dark passenger? In a way, I kind of think that was directly related or pulled inspiration from Dahmer, because Dahmer started off killing animals, and he said he wanted to see what the insides were like. And then, for a lack of better words, better whatever, it got too boring for him. So then he moved on to humans, and then it just kept progressing and progressing and progressing even more.
In biology class, we had the usual dissection of fetal pigs, and I took the remains of that home and kept the skeleton of it, and I just started branching out. Dogs, cats. And all I know is that I wanted to see what the insides of these animals looked like. It was just mystifying to me how the insides of the animal looked. There was a sort of general excitement for me. I don't know why. After the second time, it seemed like the compulsion to do it was too strong, and I didn't even try to stop it after that. But before the second time, things had been building up gradually, going to bookstores, going to the bars, the gay bars, bath clubs. When that wasn't enough, buying sleeping pills and using it on various guys in the bath clubs. It just escalated slowly but surely. And after the second time, which was not planned, it was out of control. It felt like it was out of control.
A lot has definitely changed since all this came to a head in 1991. The city is different. The city still hurts. The city is still pissed off. The city still wants absolutely nothing to do with anything Dahmer, which is completely understandable. Now, the street that I'm walking on right now was a popular street back in the 90s. Dahmer would come here. There was a lot of different gay bars on this street, and he would stop and try to pick up men or boys and bring them back to his place. Now, a lot of those bars are gone, but there's still one bar that's here that has ties to Dahmer. And that place is this bar right here. It's called Shaker's Bar. Now, I don't know if you can see the ghost in the window up there, but this place does ghost tours. 1920s tour. Supposedly it has some ties to the mafia, but it caused a lot of controversy here in Milwaukee because they started doing a Dahmer tour. The people in the town were not happy about it. I will say this about Milwaukee though, there is a lot of really cool buildings. And there's not much street art, but what is here, it does look pretty neat. Look at this here. I love whenever they do these advertisements on the side of the wall. It says 1894 Shakers. And if we walk up to the front, you can see they do have some ghosts on their signage. Now sadly this place isn't open. They open up at 5 o'clock. Which is all right. We're not big bar drinkers. We're just here to just kind of take in the sights, tell the story of Dahmer, and just keep moving on. Right now I'm walking the alleyway that's right beside Shakers, and I can't help but imagine, you know, early 90s, Dahmer just kind of walking the streets here. It's pretty surreal. Now I remember being in school, sitting in the library, reading true crime books about Ted Bundy and Charles Manson, Dennis Nielsen, Mary Flora Bell. And I think that's one of the things that really started my interest in like the macabre and true crime. It's pretty mind-boggling. We now find ourselves across town in a cemetery known as Holy Cross Cemetery. Now there are 2 victims of Dahmer buried here. The first one is in this outside mausoleum. Now if I'm not mistaken, Baby Ghoul, he's right down here. Let's see, there he is. Conorak synthasomophone, 1976 to 1991. Now this one hits extra hard. Remember early in this video when we were standing out front of where Dahmer's apartment building was, and I mentioned about the 14-year-old boy that was sitting outside on the steps, and then the police came, and somehow Dahmer convinced them to let him back up to the apartment. This is the 14-year-old boy. Now, I don't know who came by recently and put this little flower in the little vase for him, but it's nice to see that the victims are being remembered. Obviously, if you do the math, 1991 minus 1976, it makes it 15 years old, not 14. But he was actually 14 when he died. His birthday was in May, so the dates are correct. They just don't have the birth date and the death date, the month, written there. Now let it be known, I am not used to the snowy weather, the snowy cold weather anymore. I left the East Coast quite some time ago. I left the Northeast, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, quite some time ago. And I am freezing. But right now we're walking over to where Curtis Strouder is buried. Now Curtis was Dahmer's 10th victim. Even though I'm not used to it, the snow, you can't deny it's beautiful. But here it is, my beloved grandson, I love you. Curtis Durrell Strouder, April 6, 1973 to February 18, 1991. Again, Curtis was Dahmer's 10th victim. Of course, this is just 2 of the lives that were taken by Dahmer. There are others. Sadly, quite a few of them don't have families. They are left unknown. Hicks, the first victim, he's buried in Ohio, I do believe. But the 2 here, the 2 murder victims here in Milwaukee are buried here at Holy Cross Cemetery. I know it's not much paying respects. And doing what we do, tracking down the history that we do, I can't even fathom this. Driving through Milwaukee, there's a lot of bars, a lot of old buildings. But I can't imagine something like this happening in a town, in a city like Milwaukee.
In Wisconsin today, Jeffrey Dahmer died. He was murdered in the prison where he was sent in 1991 for murdering 17 men and boys. In 1991, the revelation that he had eaten or otherwise defiled some of his victims revolted the nation. His death may not be as shocking. Here's ABC's Aaron Hayes.
Jeffrey Dahmer met his death this morning while working as a janitor, cleaning a prison bathroom. Another inmate is suspected of beating him to death at this prison in Wisconsin. Authorities here say Dahmer died of massive head injuries. A second inmate injured in the attack is in critical condition.
What was found at the scene was a bloody broom handle. That's all I know.
To many, including Dahmer's own attorney, it comes as little surprise.
I wasn't shocked because I thought that Jeffrey Dahmer would end up this way.
At his sentencing, families of victims had lashed out at him, crying, threatening. Many today said even his death brings little consolation.
The hurt is worse now because he's not suffering like we are.
Other family members, in an odd twist, hope to gain from Dahmer's death. An attorney representing 8 of the families today pushed police to release Dahmer's belongings so they can be auctioned off. On the list, one of Dahmer's refrigerators where victims' remains were found, and an 80-quart kettle. The families hope to make at least $100,000 from the sale.
We don't consider that there's been closure on the Dahmer chapter episode as far as the victim families are concerned until there's compensation.
Ironically, at his sentencing, where he was given life without parole, Dahmer said he was ready for death.
Frankly, I want a death for myself. I know my time in prison will be terrible, but I deserve whatever I get because of what I have done.
Jeffrey Dahmer had served just over 2 years in prison.
Wherever I come, bad luck just comes my way. Wherever I go, hard luck is there to stay. Good luck never stays a day. A bad luck's always coming my way.